First of all, I hope when I get to the ripe young age of Jim that I'll still be able to fit my uniform. You're looking good there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for being a symbol of courage and hope in our world. We're in a season of gratitude here at Cathedral of Hope United Church of Christ, and over these last few months we have been challenging ourselves about what it really means to be a people of gratitude. Last month we talked a lot about generosity and reminded ourselves that generosity is not about what we put in the plate. Generosity is not about whether we're a tither or whether we're not a tither. Generosity is really not so much about money as it is about a way of life. It's about reminding ourselves that we come from a place of generosity. That is, generosity lives out in us through our time, our talent, and our treasure. And that it's lived out in the way in which we live as community. That sense of generosity, knowing that the generous love of God has lavished us, and through that generosity we are called to lavish that love upon one another. It is that living from a place of generosity that perhaps transforms us. Reminds us of the lens through which we see the world. And through that sense of generosity, through that sense of being in partnership with one another, the partnership that we have with God, through that generosity, perhaps the world may be changed. We came into this season reminding ourselves, or perhaps building on that place of generosity to a place of gratitude. And I believe that those two things are not mutually exclusive. I believe those things are interconnected. That we move in our place of generosity to a place of gratitude. And that our lives should be earmarked, should be the markings of Christ as we live out that gratitude in the world. Gratitude for who we are, the way in which God has created us. Gratitude that we are here this day. Gratitude for one another. Indeed, we started this whole sermon series by being reminded that each and every one of us has something to be grateful for. That each and every one of us should count our blessings one by one. Count them in our lives so that we might perhaps have a shift in our attitude about how we live our lives. If you live from a place of negativity, you will live in negativity. But if you could shift your mindset, if we could look through a lens of gratitude, what might happen to us if we were to live in that place of gratitude? Gratitude for one another. We shared last week how grateful we are called to have the gifts in our lives, but also the gifts of the people who surround us. I know that in looking at this congregation, there are many of us who are grateful for the people who sit next to us. Grateful for their gifts, grateful for their lives, grateful for the ways in which they impact our lives. But that sense of gratitude is not just about the gifts in others. That gratitude is also the gifts that live within inside us. The gifts of transformation, the gifts of challenge, the gifts of opportunity, the gifts of sacrifice, the gifts go on and on. As we are reminded that they are gifts that have been offered to us, that we are called to share with one another. That is the good news of Jesus, that we share with one another. Over and over again, Jesus would remark on the ways in which the community is called to share one with another. It is that hallmark of a Christian life, of a life that is called to follow Jesus, a life that is transforming, will be a life that knows its own gifts and is giftedness to those around us. I'm grateful for so many people in this congregation who impact my life and who are free and willing to share who they are with me and with my family. And my prayer is that the giftedness that I have, which perhaps is different but is a gift nonetheless, is shared also so that our lives may be more complete, more whole, more in the way of Jesus. Today we move in that sense of gratitude to understand that perhaps gratitude is a movement of the heart. Perhaps we can move our gratitude from the headspace that so many of us live in to a place of the heart, to a place that perhaps doesn't see the world in the way that our heads see the world, but the ways in which we are called to break down barriers and systems of oppression that perhaps only comes from the heart. Jesus, in his reading, the reading that we shared this morning, Jesus offered to his disciples a new commandment. That wasn't to say that the old commandments weren't any good, but Jesus came to reconcile people to this notion of a God of love and gave a new commandment. And the new commandment was to love one another as I have loved you. No greater love has someone that they would lay down their life for a friend. And how appropriate that we should be reading that today on Veterans Day. Men and women alike who would go into the country, into the world, and to protect and to serve, laying down, if necessary, their lives for their friends. Hear that the friends that Jesus talks of is not necessarily the people we share a pew with today. I always say this is a side note, but it's always interesting for me that we're not a perfect church and we're not always friends with one another. It's always amazing sometimes when I see people who so often sit together every single week, and one week I'll look out and I'll see you on opposite sides of the church. I get to the point where I'm like, oh girl, something happened this week. Jesus doesn't call us friends based on our relationships. Jesus calls us friends based on the fact that he would lay down his life for us, even strangers. In fact, Jesus goes on to say that I lay down my life for my friends because I no longer call you slaves or servants. I call you friends. That's why sometimes we sing that song, I am a friend of God. Because we need to understand that we are friends of God and God is friends with us. Jesus certainly made friends with his disciples. And they weren't all people that he would necessarily choose to mix with. These were a motley crew just like we are this morning. And Jesus would share his life with those friends, with those folks that he journeyed with and called alongside to himself. Remember, there was a tax collector among them. They were just as much loathed then as they are now. Sorry, CPAs amongst us. The truth is that Jesus was not concerned necessarily with the outward appearance or about the ways in which we interpreted ourselves, the labels that we give ourselves. Jesus was more concerned with this attitude of the heart. Perhaps it was the attitude of the heart that broke down the barriers of the ways in which we see one another, the way in which we judge one another, the labels that we put on one another. Jesus called his disciples and perhaps calls us today to have this shift from thinking about the world just from the head and thinking about it from the heart, from this place of love. It always seems unfortunate to me that in the English language, we only have one word for love. It's unfortunate because in the Greek and in the Hebrew and in other languages, there are multiple names for love, depending on the kind of love that you are wanting to offer. We say that I have as much love for Janice in the same way that I say I love cabbage. Believe me, Janice, the love I have for you is very different from the love that I have for cabbage. And yet it is the same word that we use for our intimacy as well as just for the things that we experience. Jesus wanted to remind us perhaps that the love that he is talking about is this agape love. This love that puts the needs of another before our own needs. This kind of love that has a vested interest in who you are. A vested interest so much that Jesus would lay down his life for us. Now, before we think that was the end of the story, remember Jesus also was resurrected and ascended into heaven and ultimately lavished the Holy Spirit upon us. So there's good news. But he laid down his life for us so that we might be friends of God. The love that we are called to have for one another is that kind of love. Love one another as I have loved you. A love that says, I have as much interest in you being successful as I have in someone else and myself being successful. It is that gratitude that helps us to understand this gratitude to a God who came amongst us, lived amongst us, and demonstrated how it's possible. I don't know about you, but we live in a world that is so polarized. So polarized right now, so polarized by those who we want to associate ourselves with and those that we don't want to associate ourselves with. It seems as if we have kind of hunkered down to living in a safe space, and there's nothing wrong in living in safe space. But sometimes that means that we only talk to those who look like us, think like us, believe like us. We're so polarized in our world, so polarized in our nation. Yet if we are called to love one another as God has loved us, we can't do that by just going from our heads. We can't do that just by associating ourselves with people who look like us. We have to find a way in which we can shift the lens through which we see the world to a place of the heart, because I do believe ultimately that humanity is good. I do believe that ultimately we have a lot more in common than the things that divide us. And we must find the way. Find that place where we can meet on those bridges of humanity that calls us to love one another as God has loved us. And believe me, it's not always easy. This week here in Dallas, the Red Letter Christian Conference is a group of people who have made a concerted effort to find a space together of those who perhaps necessarily agree and those who don't agree. To find a common place in which we might create sacred space. And in that sacred space, perhaps begin this dangerous and exciting journey of marrying together progressive Christians and evangelical Christians. Cathedral of Hope will be very present at that conference. Our choir will be singing at that conference. And our preachers will be preaching at that conference. Putting ourselves out there, allowing our lives to be a beacon for us all. It's not to add some glory to who we are. It's because we believe that when Jesus said, "Love one another as I have loved you," that we have to put some rubber hitting the road and finding some common places, because if we don't do that, there will be no healing and there will be no reconciliation. And if there is one thing that Jesus' ministry teaches us, is that we must love and heal and reconcile. If we accept God's forgiveness for ourselves, we must provide forgiveness for one another. It is that good news. It is that sense of gratitude that there, but by the grace of God, there, but by the grace of a loving God who created me and you just the way we are. And so we step out, just as Jesus stepped out. Just as you and I are called to step out, to see the world through a different lens, not from the head. There would be enough reasons for me not to go this week. I don't want to be around those people. I don't want them to judge me. I don't want them to tell me that I'm going to go to hell in a handbasket. A pretty handbasket. But perhaps I might be able to make theirs a little prettier too. And we'll go together. But perhaps that's what Jesus meant when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Perhaps what Jesus was really trying to say was that there is a way. And in that way, it may not be my way, it may not be the evangelical way, although I consider myself an evangelical. I'm just saying, I'm reclaiming that word. Perhaps what Jesus was trying to say was that we must find the way to find that common road, that place where we don't have to agree on everything, but we have to follow Jesus. For it is in that following that we find the truth. And ultimately, I believe, we find life. Life in itself that sees the world not from the place of the head, not the separation by who we voted for last week, but by the way, the truth, and the life that might offer some hope to the world. A sense of gratitude that moves from our head to our heart is a heart movement that says, no matter what you've done to me, no matter how many times you've hurt me, no matter how many times you've sent me that rotten email on Monday morning. Sorry, I'm just working out my anger.
Lucky me.
Nothing personal. Yeah. That I must see you as a human being, as a follower of Jesus, and find ways to stay on the road together so that we might find Jesus together. Love one another as I have loved you is that sense of gratitude that moves to a place of the heart. Hear me, this is not about being a doormat. This is not about saying that no matter what's happened to you, you just go back for more. Isn't that the definition of insanity? You do the same thing over and over again and accept a different result. But it is the road that Jesus calls us on to reconcile with one another and to find ways in which we stay in community and in harmony with one another. So that whilst you may be on a different pew this week, perhaps next week you might just be able to get back together and be a living testimony of what it means to reconcile, to find a way when perhaps we thought there was no way. Isn't that the work of God? To find a way where we think there is no way. That's not work you can do with your head. That's work you do with your heart. For perhaps our heart doesn't see our differences. Perhaps our heart doesn't judge one another within the first 5.2 seconds of seeing another person. Perhaps our hearts might be just open enough to the possibility that you're not a bad person, Jane, and that I really do want to spend time in your company and to know more about you. Or to say to an evangelical straight white man, cisgender in America, I need to sit with you because I need to know how you think, how you feel, and why you come to the conclusion about who God is, and that's okay. Space together. Living together. That is the work of the heart, not of the head. So on this day, I ask and I challenge us as Cathedral of Hope that we come with, yes, a place of gratitude, that we sit amongst people who agree with us or mostly agree with us, that we're grateful that we get to have this opportunity on Sunday mornings, but it is the work beyond Sunday that makes the difference. The work of our heart that softens and opens and is able then to echo the words of Jesus when he said, love one another as I have loved you. Think on that for a moment, on the way in which God, Jesus, has lavished love upon us regardless of our circumstances, but that God who has lavished love upon us and then calls us to love one another that way. Not with all of our conditions, not with all of our preconceived ideas, not with, I will love you if, but I will love you and find a way that we might be together. That is the work of the heart. And perhaps in that we might be able to end the song that was so popular in my childhood, and hopefully some of you will remember. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. That's all I know. May it be so, not at the completion of a sermon on a Sunday morning, but on the completion of our lives as we go into the world. Love one another as I have loved you. A gratitude of the heart, and it begins here. God bless you. Cathedral of Hope, United Church of Christ.